tying up a popular nymph pattern today. This is a Pheasant Tail Nymph variant, I guess you would call it, which actually the American Pheasant Tail is kind of a variant from the original Pheasant Tail, but not to get too far off there, this is a bead head flashback Pheasant Tail Nymph. The only difference between this and a regular Pheasant Tail Nymph, it's got a bead on the front and it has a flashback on the back here. When tying something like this, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One, the bead is going to take up some space. So if you're wanting your resulting Pheasant Tail Nymph, whatever size hook that you're tying on, to have certain proportions, your abdomen and your thorax need to be a certain length. You have to take into account that you're going to need a little bit longer hook to accommodate the bead on the front. If I were even to tie this as a flashback Pheasant Tail Nymph non-bead head, then I'd probably use a little bit shorter hook so that the eye was right back behind that bead instead of in the front. The flashback can be multiple different materials. I'm just using some pearl tinsel, some flat pearl tinsel on this. And you can vary the colors up on this too if you want to use some dyed pheasant tail or a silver bead or a different color flashback. That's up to you. So that's the bead head flashback Pheasant Tail Nymph. I'll get started. I'm going to start the bead head flashback Pheasant Tail Nymph with my hook and the vise. This is a R74 in a size 10. That's a 3X long streamer hook. I just like this a little bit better. If you like a little bit shorter body, you could go with 3906B. That's a Mustad 3906B, or like a R73, which is a 2X long streamer hook. I just like a little bit longer hook for this, partly because we've got this bead on the front here. So if you use, a standard 3906 or even a 3906B with that bead on there, the body to me is just a little bit shorter. So I'm going to debarb the hook. Now I already have the bead on here. This is just a 1/8 inch diameter copper bead. You could go with a gold bead or a silver bead on this. It's up to you. For thread, I'm using a Danville 70 Denier in black. I'm going to attach the thread behind the bead here. This is tied pretty much just like a regular Pheasant Tail Nymph. The exception here is obviously the bead that's on front, and we have the flashback that we're going to put in here. So after I get my thread attached, I'm going to run it down to about the point of the hook. And here I'm going to tie in my pheasant tail. Now I'm just using some regular ring-necked pheasant tail for this. If this is a smaller hook, say a 14 or 16, I might be able to get most of this tied and done with just these nice long barbs right here off that tail, but I'm going to have to do this in a couple of different clumps. Actually 3 different clumps when I think about it, just because it's a little bit easier. So I'm going to isolate somewhere in the neighborhood of a dozen, maybe 15 barbs off of that. And that's going to be the tail fibers for this. I like to make the tails and even the resulting legs on these a little bit fuller to start out with, simply because as you fish this and you start catching fish, they're going to get broken off. Now I could fold this back if I wanted to and try to use this for the abdomen, but again, I just find on this hook, I'm better off tying in another clump for that. So now the materials we're going to tie in is going to be the wire first, then the flashback, and then the pheasant tail, because you have to do it in kind of the reverse order of how you're applying it. The first thing we're going to apply for the abdomen is going to be wrapping the pheasant tail. Then we're going to bring the flashback over, and then we're going to wrap that with the wire. So I'm just using a medium copper wire here. I'm going to tie that in. I'm actually going to secure that on my side. And you don't have to worry about being real smooth and fastidious with the body here. I'm not quite all the way back. I'm going to tie in the flash. Now this is just a UTC pearl tinsel, flat pearl tinsel in a large. There's multiple different things you could use for this if you wanted, even some Magnum Flashabou. I've tied these using some 3 or 4 strips of Magnum Flashabou, but I find that this tinsel here, this pearl tinsel, is nice because it's wide and it flattens out right on the hook, real nice and easy. I want to tie that in and secure that so it stays right on top. Now I'm going to wrap down just a little bit past where I had all that anchored in, so that that is the very end of the body, or I should say the abdomen. I'm going to take another clump of pheasant tail fibers, maybe about the same density, a dozen, 15 fibers, something like that. And I'm going to tie these in. I'm going to tie these in just by the tips here. These we're going to wrap in as our abdomen. So I want them to start narrow, the tips right here, back here, so that I get a little bit of an increase in diameter as I move forward. I'm going to secure that in, wrap all the way down to the end of the body, and then wrap forward. A little bit more wax on my thread. Now I'm going to wrap forward to just about the 2/3 spot on the hook. This is where this is going to be the abdomen and this is going to be our thorax. You do want to be a little careful in terms of if needed, I would lean on actually having the thread back about halfway and just split the difference between the thorax and the abdomen. If you're too far up here, then that thorax just gets all crowded in on that bead. Now we're just going to wrap in the pheasant tail barbs, just like you would a regular pheasant tail nymph. Again, I could have used the other barbs that I had from the tail. It's a little dicey when all of this gets too short and, fat old fingers have to grab a hold of that. So it's just easier to tie in a second clump for me. Securing those in, I'm going to take that flashback, or I should say that flat tinsel, and just right straight over the back here. Now I am wrapping forward into the thorax space because whatever's up here will give me kind of a base for the thorax. It'll get covered up. Now, the reason why I put the wire on my side of the hook shank is I'm going to counter wrap the wire on here so that it helps to go across pheasant tail barbs that I used for the abdomen. It helps to protect them while this fly is being fished. Put in an extra wrap here to secure that. I'm going to put in about a dozen wraps here to secure that in, and then I will brace the hook and fatigue that wire off. That's the only problem with when you wrap that in, counter wrap it in, it goes against the natural flow of those thread wraps, and sometimes when you try to fatigue that off, it just loosens the whole thing up. Moving my thread back to the end of the thorax here, I'll put that flash back over. I'm going to trim that a little bit shorter because I don't need all of that hanging out there. The thorax is made up of some peacock herl and more pheasant tail fibers, or I should say barbs. So I'm going to grab another clump. This one's a little bit thicker, maybe about 20 barbs. And the primary reason is I want it thicker to have a little bit thicker wing case. This gets wrapped in and folded over for our wing case. Thing is, you have to measure this because we want these tips are going to come folded over forward and then like this and then pushed rearward. And we want them to go about halfway down the actual body. So if that's the case, then these are going to end up being tied in right here. We have the actual distance of our thorax here. And then I have to, this is going to get wrapped over. So this spot right here is where I'm going to wrap these in. And that way you can test this a little bit if you want. That way you can see these will fold over for the wing case, and then this gets folded back for our legs. If they're a little long, it doesn't bother me if they're just a little long. As a matter of fact, I'd have them a little bit longer before I'd have them short. I'm going to wrap this down here and actually take some of these and wrap this back down. And this is just going to give me a little bit of bulk underneath that thorax. Let me get my thread my bobbin rethreaded. So continuing, as before I was so rudely interrupted by my thread breaking, I fold those back and simply to give me a little bit more bulk in the thorax area. You don't have to. The Peacock Herl will do a nice job on its own. Make certain that when you're folding this back, we don't get this mixed up with what's going to be our wing case and our legs. I'm going to wrap this in and smooth all of this off. Getting my thread right down into the thorax. See, with some of the wrapping back here, I've actually managed to get that thorax a little bit longer. Just takes a little bit of practice there. I'm going to use, for this size hook, I'm just using 2 Peacock Herls. I'm going to tie in here. That's going to be more than enough. If I were doing this on, say, a 12 or 14, definitely a 14 or, say, a 16, then I would only be using 1 Peacock Herl. As long as it's long enough, you're going to be just fine. And I want to be kind of up behind the bead, but not exactly pressing on it. Because remember, I still have to tie in the wing case and the flashback, and then push the legs rearward. So I'm going to wrap that in to my thread. A few wraps to secure that Peacock Herl. I'm going to fold over those tips of pheasant tail. Bring those right up to behind the bead. Keeping those on top, I'm going to pull down with that thread to kind of bring them down and wedge them behind that bead. Then I'm going to separate them. These ended up a little bit short, I think. I think they'll be fine. I just want to separate these and pull some on my side and some on the other side. Again, this is where old fat fingers have a more difficult time. Get these on the sides a little bit more. Get in Just a few wraps. Now see, those wraps just all slid down right into the bead, and that's fine. I just want to get on top of that a little bit so that those legs are all forced in a rearward direction. And those actually turned out pretty good. I'll take this flash here, fold it over, right down on top. And again, I'm going to put in just a few wraps, and that's to jam that rearward. I always find it interesting how on some of these flies, like the legs on this side ended up being a little bit shorter than the legs on the other side. I don't quite understand that. I mean, I understand it in that some of the barbs were a little bit longer, but when you're getting them all together and tying them in, I'm not certain how it ends up that way. But I think it will fish just fine. Now, you could tie this off if you want now, put some head cement on it, and it's done. However, I like to take another Peacock Herl and just get a couple wraps in here just to cover up the thread wraps. That's all we're doing here. I'm just going to wrap this in, bring my thread right up to the bead, and I'm just putting in a couple, 2, maybe 3 tops wraps, and that's just to cover up that gap, the thread and everything in that gap. I'll get a couple, 2, 3 wraps on there to secure it. Trim that away. Another wrap or 2 just to lock that in. And whip finish. Now I'm going to put some head cement on this, and I'm actually just going to kind of lean this on the bead, the back side of that bead, and let that just kind of roll down that bead into that Peacock Herl. Yeah, see, if you get too much like I did right there, it kind of mats down that Peacock Herl a little bit. There you go. So that is a bead head flashback pheasant tail nymph. Like I said, it's just like a standard pheasant tail nymph, but with the flashback being put in there as well as the bead head in there. So there you go. Thanks for watching today. Thank you for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned a new pattern, at least a tip or trick here and there. If you'd like to help Dress Irons, you can like, comment, share, subscribe, all those wonderful things for the video. You can also head out to dressedirons.com where you can buy flies, tools, stickers, and merch, or you can join a growing community over on Locals at the Dressed Irons Fly Tying Guild. You can also donate to Dressed Irons if you want through the link at the bottom of the description. I thank everybody for their ongoing support, as it really does help the creation of these videos. And what's important is to remember, only fly tying. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.